What makes images look good? When we look at an image, what exactly is it about that image that makes us stop scrolling on our feeds and pay attention? What is it that we feel in the moment? And more importantly, at least for you watching this video right now, how does it communicate that feeling? That's what we're uncovering today in the next installment of What Makes Images Look Good. And this week we have a very special guest, fellow YouTuber and portrait photography extraordinaire, Julia Trotty. What we are aiming for here is finding out what makes an image successful at visually communicating. So in this series, I'm going to be talking a lot about visual patterns, about emotion, and hopefully you can start to see a trend in the visual communication techniques used and the success of an image so that you can then start to build your own sense of good taste. Now, keep in mind, as always, in YouTube videos and in life, take all of this opinion with a gigantic grain of salt because ultimately it is just all subjective opinion. But as a lifelong creative across many disciplines and as a Sony digital imaging ambassador, I hope to impart at least some of my experience onto you for free, although hitting that like button and subscribing would also be a great way to support what I am doing. All right, I'm super excited about this one because I love Julia's work and I look up to her portraits because they're not only just very technically perfect, they're also super emotive and super expressive as well. And I really, really enjoy her work. So I'm super excited to show you some of the reasons why I love her work. And we've got 6 images that she's sent today for this video. And she's also sent a bunch of context and descriptions for all of these images too. So let's get into the very first one and we can start to dissect everything. So she says that all of these images minus the first one were taken for lens and or camera reviews on YouTube. So the main aim with my photos during those sessions is to capture beautiful portraits while testing the limitations and capabilities of the gear that I'm using. This is super important because these shoots aren't for commercial use. They're not for a particular campaign or objective or anything like that that is outside of the realm of just trying to test for lenses and for different bodies and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of combination and approach to her portraits in this instance will obviously look a certain way, and we'll get into that as we go further along into the video. But yeah, just keep that in mind because that is really, really important. Okay, so for this first image, she says, my friend and I went out to take photos for fun, and after driving the whole way to our location, turns out that it was the windiest day there ever. We tried to make the most of it anyway, and I took this photo during a moment where she was in disbelief at our luck, but I loved how it turned out. So this image is so nice. I mean, I say that blandly, but I don't know how else to describe. It's just a lovely image. You know, the first thing that I feel when I look at it is just this sense of in the moment, just pure fun. You know, just a very organic, just lovely natural moment. It has a very light quality to it, and I'm talking emotionally, not like contrast or tonal values wise. It just feels very light to me, light and fun and playful. You know, portraits are and can be so very not serious, but very I don't even know what the word is, just very directive, very directed, very a little bit more on the serious side. But this in this instance is just such a lovely fun kind of shot. So one thing that draws my eye straight away is all of the flyaways she's got going on here, and then all of these flyaways here. You know, there's like some here and all here. It's just chaos, absolutely just chaos. And I think it's so fun and great for her to include that as a portrait image, because oftentimes the flyaways are the bits that you Photoshop out or you take out, or, you know, you readjust your model because it's happening too much, especially if it's windy. But in this case, accentuates the feeling. It accentuates the emotion that's going on in this image, and it brings about, well, it aids the lightness of the feel for me anyway. I also love that just from a balance perspective, it just so happens that the flyaway, this larger one up here, like directly fit into this kind of gap where she's framed the rocks. And as a balance thing, it just so happened to be perfect, and I really love that too. But in terms of visual patterns, while we're on the subject, she's obviously got a whole lot of frames in this top section of the rock, and then this bottom section here that she's also framed in it. So you can kind of tell what is important in this image. It is all of this kind of area. I've been here before in the Blue Mountains. It is almost like a cave kind of thing. So you sit in this kind of cutout in the middle of the rock, and then you have your subject, and then it like kind of squeezes in, and it looks really, really cool. But yeah, I love it. It's simple. The model is styled very, not plainly, but very simply, and it's not over the top. She has a lovely set of gold earrings. She has what looks like a gold necklace, white kind of top, gold accents on the pants, and white shoes to match the top. And from a contrast perspective, you have a lot of tonal contrast going on here. You have somewhat dark areas here, then a light top, and then dark areas again. And so again, when your eyes are going from left to right, they immediately become interrupted here, and then there's continuity here, and then interrupted again, and then continuity again. So very simple thing that you can do that's not specifically a photography technique. It is a styling thing when it comes to portraits, which is actually immensely important when it comes to the model and the placement and where you're putting your model in your overall scene. One thing that I think about a lot when it comes to portraiture is the role of the photographer, right? Portraiture is a collaboration between two people, and the model does a lot of the heavy lifting, right? With the expressions and the experience and the shape and what's going on. But also the photographer has a lot of responsibility in addressing what that is. For me is something that I always think about. Where my mind goes to that is, the photographer is responsible for the background. Where are you placing your model? What are they doing in that context? What is the context, and how do you set that up? And because as the photographer, oh, I want to go shoot here, or maybe this location might look good, whatever. Your responsibility as a portrait photographer is also being like, okay, I know the context. How can I style the model to make her look the best within that context? In this case, it is quite a tonal contrast going on, light, dark, light, dark. But thinking about that in your shoots and moving forward in your shoots, I think is tremendously useful. And she's done that amazingly here. The last thing I will call out here is the light. The light, when it comes to portraiture, it's quite difficult to get right. And faces are very specific with light. Certain angles of light and how you place them are more flattering than others. And so what it looks like here is a backlit kind of scene. So this is the sun, and then like my son, and then the rays are coming out in like this kind of general direction, right? And that means that the subject is backlit because the sun is coming this way, and then you can actually see the shadows down here, right? But the light on the model's face has been bounced somewhat. You can see there's like a slight highlight here on the bottom of her chin, and slight highlight here on the side of her face. And then, you've even got some like reflected light kind of back here on the shoulders. Kind of difficult to see on YouTube compression, I'm sure. But the cave is doing a lot of the light bouncing as well. And so usually you would have this kind of image as like a completely backlit shot, And so a lot of the details of her face and, the details of her arms and that kind of stuff would have been removed or at least darkened somewhat. I'm not too sure whether Julia has brought this up in post or not, but I do love how it's quite evenly lit from both sides, even though this is majoritively a backlit shot. All right, so the second image, Julia has mentioned, I was reviewing a camera for this shoot, but I wanted the styling to be contradictory. I decided to use a very whimsical outfit and beautiful, dreamy backlight in an urban, kind of run-down location with cracks on the wall. I love creating this mismatching style for my photos sometimes. There's a lot going on here. So she's described the scene. This, as she mentioned before, the little preamble before all of the images, this was for a YouTube review. But there's a lot of things going on here. So this feels to me, and honestly, in my opinion anyway, the color palette and the model's attire really give a whimsical feel to the image. I think that is what does the heavy lifting when it comes to a whimsical kind of dreamy style, especially in the setting. Although, I don't know, this setting is kind of nice. Like, I think the contrast is nice. The dress is light. It is beautiful, very delicate and gentle. And then the wall, I don't know, it's harsh and it has cracks and it's kind of old and all this kind of stuff down here. And, it's not very, like, there's a whole bunch of leaves and it's not very nice. But because it's a cream color, what's going on here is that she's actually used what's called an analogous color palette. So you've got yellows, you've got pinks, some kind of greens, but it's all on one half of the color wheel. And so that goes together. That gives the image in this instance, a warm tinge to it because all of the colors are shifted to one side. And I think that's really lovely. I'm not too sure if it's intentional or not, if she intentionally chose a cream colored wall. But it looks great. I think it ties in really, really well. One thing that you will see with all of her work is she uses what I was talking about in Liam's video, where you put the lead eye in the horizontal center of the image. So the line is here, my straight line, and her lead eye is right there. And so as a viewer, you are immediately oriented to that eye. You immediately want to see where it is, and it clicks very, very quickly. She's also put that eye on the upper third as well. So if you imagine the rule of thirds being somewhat like this, she's got two layout kind of techniques stacked on top of each other. She's using the top third and she's using the horizontal middle as well. Very, very good. One other thing I will point out is this image is using some very unconventional light. So obviously the light is coming from here. And here's my lovely sun again. And you can see the shadows this way. They're kind of, it's going in this direction. And so the sides of her body are what's being hit. Except she's got so much light on this side of her face as well. I don't know whether Julia has lit her up from the other direction, which I think would be an absolute masterful play. But if she hasn't, this is what's happening. There's no shadow here. Usually, if the light is coming from this direction, you would at least have, this section of her hair or like the bottom of her ear, or even like the bits of her hand or the back of her dress and all that kind of stuff. All of those areas would be in shadow. And yet it's lit so well. There's directionality to the lighting on this image, but there's also a very concerned kind of effort to make sure that the shadows aren't so crushed and disappearing from the model. I think that's really, really nice, and it gives It gives the image a very light and natural feel. And this is a theme that runs throughout all of Julia's work. It is very, the way she edits her portraits are very natural. It is very light. It is very true to life, but it is at the same time very whimsical and dreamy, and it's lovely. Okay, if you're enjoying this video so far, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button for me so that I know it's good enough to make even more free videos just like this in the future. Alrighty, moving on. So image 3, she says, I am so drawn to leaves and greenery, and there was this huge plant on the side of the road that was calling my name. It had the most stunning large leaves. It was just at the end of a cul-de-sac on the other side of a footpath across from a stranger's house. I asked the model to sit on the fence so that she could then be surrounded and right in between the leaves. This is a play on green. I respect any photographer who uses the color green this boldly. Just really, really lovely. This for me is such a classic portrait done so tastefully. And I know I'm just talking up Julia's work, but I really enjoy it. And there are flaws to everything, yes, but this series is all about showing you why images are successful, not why they are unsuccessful. And I think for this image, it's like there's so many things going on, and I really want to explain why I'm drawn to this image, and yeah, why it's just such a classic like portrait for me anyway. First thing is, again, the horizontal center right in the middle, perfect distance between left, perfect distance between right. In this instance, she's chosen a aperture that allows both eyes to be in focus. So usually, there is some kind of trailing off here when it comes to bokeh around here, but for the most part, both of the model's eyes are in focus. They are on very similar planes, which is great to see. One of the things that I love about it is the green, as I mentioned. It is a very simple image. There's only two main large colors at play here. There is, the color of her skin, and then there's the green. And that keeps things visually simple for you. When you look at this image, you're only parsing two colors quickly, which again makes you really hone in on the things that are important in the image very, very quickly. So all of this, what I love is that I can see this like this kind of vignette going on, this darkness across the sides here that really forces your eyes to be centered in and really gives the attention to the model's face. It's just, yeah, it's solid. One of the other things that I love is the outfit choice. So the outfit is very delicate, white, black, but honestly, almost monotone, almost desaturated completely. But the pattern and the texture is so spotty and so much going on. And that's such a contrast between what's right next to it, which is just a simple leaf. So if you take this section of the composition and you split it in two, right? This is just simple and this is chaotic. And that has the effect of accentuating where her body starts and ends in this composition anyway. You can clearly see that this is her. There's so many occasions where you might style a model and she's wearing a single color with no patterns, no textures or anything like that. And you can imagine in this case, if that model is wearing, say, a nice yellow sundress, for example, and she was in this setting, she would just blend in because all of this would literally just be like a yellow, and then you would have this like kind of floating like body kind of look. And in this case, you don't get that. There's enough visual contrast in terms of texture, in terms of pattern, in terms of color even, that you can see where the shape of her body is. And I think that is super important as well. Overall, as a portrait, as a very classical close-up, shoulders up kind of portrait. I think this is an absolute masterclass. One thing that I love about it is I don't really know where the light is coming from. It is lit in such a way that it seems that, judging by the shadows on the bottom of her chin, the light is somewhere up here, or maybe it's like an overcast day, and then there's like the shade of a tree, maybe a couple of meters up, and then that's kind of blocking the rest of the light or something like that. I don't know what's really going on here. Plus, there's a lot of like post-processing on the face and the highlights and how they roll off her cheeks. But you can see all these details underneath the cheekbone on both sides. And you have like a very strong, jawline that goes in, and then a lot of shadow underneath the chin. And that gives a lot of shape and dimension to the face. And you can only achieve that with good lighting. And for her to like find this lighting in like a cul-de-sac on some random stranger's house and know what to look for and know that, okay, this is good light here, I want to use that. That takes experience, and that is definitely something worth calling out. All right, next image. She says, I was using a manual focus adapted vintage lens for this photo shoot. Very difficult. And this was taken right towards the end of the session. I asked the model to crouch down so that she could be in this little section of golden light that was coming in through the trees, and I liked how dappled it looked on her face and body. We noticed that there was a prominent shadow of the surrounding weeds on her leg, which we all appreciated, myself, the model, and the makeup artist who was there. So we moved a little bit to make sure you could see it as much as possible. This is a scenario that is all too familiar for me, and I'm sure many other portrait photographers out there. You're trying to shoot at the most gorgeous time of day, golden hour, whether that's sunrise or sunset, most usually sunset, and you're racing against the sun. It's coming down quickly, and then you've got to find little bits of light that you can use, and then you run from one location to the next, and you kind of just chase the sun until it's completely gone. I've been here. I love it. It's fun. With this image, you can definitely tell that's what's happening. You've got, she's calling it like dappled light, and you can see on her shoulder there's a little bit of shadow, so that's probably a leaf or something like that. But the main areas, which is this kind of triangular shape on the face, a lot of detail on the hand, kind of harsh light on her arm and the rest of the body and stuff like that. There's enough light here that it's lit in a nice way. And I really appreciate the difficulty of this scenario. She was saying that it's an adapted vintage lens shot manual. I mean, man, that's photography in hard mode right there from like a portrait photography standpoint, especially one that has such an incredible shallow depth of field. Look at this. Look, like the cat's eye on this bokeh is just so dreamy and really, really nice. But it's so shallow. It's so tremendously shallow. Even the back strands of the model's hair here are out of focus. And so I can tell that this image was definitely shot on like a f1.2, 1.4, maybe an f2, but most likely an f1.4 at like, looks like maybe 35 to 50-ish. I don't know, I'm just guessing. But it's hard to do manual focus on the eyes, and she's absolutely nailed the eye. The eye is 100% in focus. Both eyes are in focus, honestly, and even though it is starting to fall off in terms of the depth of field, she's nailed the leading eye like absolutely perfectly. Two things that she has done that are interesting to me, and perhaps where, there's exploration and there's a subjective opinion. This is a departure from her regular, using the center line and putting the leading eye on there. Instead, what she has opted for is actually optimizing for the rest of the mass of the body being shifted towards the middle of the composition. And this is another thing that you can do in your own compositions as well. Instead of always just playing on the eye, play to the rest of what's going on in the scene, the shape of the body in this instance. You have a lot of interesting shapes that the model is making with her elbows like this, a lot of angles. She's got, the squat going on. So there's an angle down here as well. And then, the torso is kind of facing upwards, and then her head is tilted down as well. So there's a lot of shapes going on here, and Julia's obviously decided that the shapes are interesting enough to make them the main focus of the image. Sure, the eyes are not in the middle, but again, if you imagine the rule of thirds, they are at least on one of the thirds, in this case, the top third. And so it does feel centered enough. It does feel balanced enough, whilst also, prioritizing the shapes of the model and the rest of what's going on in the scene. Very well done. Okay, the next image. This photo shoot was during a lens review, and in our location, I stumbled across a very large bush of these pastel blue flowers. So I knew I had to use it as our backdrop. I decided to shoot backlit for that soft glow effect, and it just so happens that the lens that I was testing out had the most beautiful lens flare, which adds that special touch to the image. I agree. This image, for me, is by far, out of all of the images she's supplied for this video, my favorite, easily. And a lot of that is due to me being very unga bunga and just liking nice settings. As a portrait photographer, I'm always thinking about what is the best background I can put for my model to bring out her emotions, to bring out what she's wearing, to bring out the rest of the scene. And for me, stuff like this, and a lot of that specular highlights and just really bright glowy feel, that to me looks so visually interesting. And it's honestly, for me, as simple as that. I really love these kinds of visual patterns when they're included in portraits like this. But let's break it down just a little bit more. So for the model, she's got this amazing pose. This is also also happens to be some of my favorite poses, where the model has like a kind of half expression, mouth slightly open, that kind of thing. Not anything too forced, not very expressive, but also not completely dead inside and subdued as well. Like that kind of balance. I think this is spot on. And for the nature of this image, Julia mentioned that it's supposed to be soft, glowy, whimsical, light. I think this kind of expression is top notch. So she did a great job on that. But again, the question of what is the role of the photographer in a portrait shooting setting, especially when, you're just doing out in the world stuff like this and, not on a commercial set, not in a studio and all the rest of it. The background, man, the background is just so gorgeous in combination with the soft glow from the lens flare. And then the actual lens flare itself is quite nice. There is this oftentimes lens flares have different colors to them, a lot of purples sometimes, and different shapes. Sometimes there'll be a more, circular kind of shape. Sometimes there'll be big kind of rings and that kind of stuff that, really permeate the rest of the image. But in this instance, it's just very simple. This line is not very thick. It's not thick enough for it to be a hindrance in what is going on in the image. So for me, it adds to the image. But again, yeah, it is the specular highlights in the bush and the bush in the flowers and stuff like that in the background that really gives it this kind of angelic feel. And then because it's backlit, you have all of these highlights, this angel lighting, really surrounding all of the hair. And it kind of gives this this glow, and that really adds to the whole feel too. And then from there, the model is wearing kind of this see-through white top And that also feels very light. So a lot of different elements here are just spot on. And then of course, you top it all off with the eye being exactly horizontal center. This image is a masterclass in the dreamy look, in my opinion. All right, the last image here. So she says, we were taking portraits at a beach location. And again, this was taken towards the end of our session. While I like taking photos that incorporate the location a lot, some of my favorite photos are captured when I make the location look more obscure in the background. In this case, I could see the sun shining through the leaves of a tree on the other side of the water, and at just the right angle, I create bokeh reflections on the surface. I asked my model to crouch down so that I could capture only water in the background of our frame. I purposely positioned her head against the brightest part of the water to give her a glow. Again, it's the photographer's job to place the model in the context of the background, right? That is your responsibility when you're out doing portraits like this. It is your responsibility to shift the model into the perfect position because the model can't see where they're going, right? It's your responsibility to make sure that they look good. And so what Julia has done is the water always has specular highlights when sun hits it directly. In this case, we have a lot of spectral highlights coming here. And what I would assume would be like a pretty large kind of glob of specular highlights in the water right behind her head. And you can see this occurring because, the sides of her hair all around here, all around here, and then even all around here as well, are lit up. So she's got this angelic kind of look to her head, and it gives her hair and her head a lot of shape. And that's something to look out for when you're out in the world. How do you position your model such that they stand out quite a bit? Because what this has as an effect is tremendous amounts of, in this instance, tonal contrast. So what we can see here is from this section to about this section, we have quite a light tone. Her skin tone is quite dark and her hair is obviously black. And then we've got light again. So again, we've got this instance where your eyes will come across and be like, oh, suddenly they're interrupted by tonal contrast. And then you get used to it, and then suddenly you're interrupted by, again, tonal contrast. And then you complete the rest of the image. And again, it gives you the sense of something that really stands out against their background. This tonal contrast, light, dark, light, dark. It is such an easy way to create more interest and intrigue in your picture. One of the other things that I love is that she has probably shot this on, I don't know, to me, it looks like an 85-1.4, especially since the background is so compressed. It almost looks like it's sitting right behind the model, but I'm sure it's actually quite a bit further away. But again, you have like a look of dreaminess because all of the specular highlights are just quite white and glowy. And then all of the f1.4 shallow depth of field will give you is, look at this. It's just all out of focus. It's just tremendously dreamy in that respect. And, if you are looking for a dreamy look for your portraits, you can't beat shallow depth of field. It is, especially for portraits, like if you have the eyes in focus, and she absolutely does, they are absolutely nailed. There's nothing like shallow depth of field to make an image feel dreamy. So all of these constituent parts that she's put together across all of her images really speak to a very mature and experienced approach when it comes to a particular look of her portrait photography. So yeah, props to her. I think she's done a wonderful job with these images, and thank you so much, Julia, for supplying them. I really enjoyed looking at them. Alrighty, I think we will leave it there for this 4th episode in this new series about what makes images look good. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed Julia's work. Please Go and follow and sub to her on YouTube and Instagram, and let me know who else you would love to see on this series so that we can make it even better and better for you guys in the future. All right, I'll see you in the next video, but until then, get out there and make something that matters. Peace.